Kevin Lee, Chief Executive Officer, Canadian Home Builders Association. Welcome back, Kevin.
Very much, Mr. Chair. For the residential construction sector, building back better is something we do every day. And as we look towards recovery from COVID, several things are clear. A home is more important than ever to Canadians, and we've seen that through the extensive activity in renovations, new construction, DIY activity, and home resales. Through these challenging times, Canadians have looked to their homes to be their workplaces, classrooms, gyms, places to relax, and hopefully for most, places to feel safe. And new construction and renovation are providing much needed jobs and economic activity during economic recovery. When we talk about housing these days, though, of course, top of mind is affordability, both in the cost of housing and in the cost of materials, particularly lumber, and more supply is the key to both. Starting with affordability, a housing supply lens is required to truly address escalating prices. This was clear prior to COVID, and the pandemic has accentuated that further. There is much that can be done through concerted efforts of all levels of government to increase supply, and there are important leadership levers available to the federal government to help make that happen. At the same time, while it may be tempting to try and cool the market with demand-side measures such activity only creates pent-up demand and limits supply. Band-aid demand-side measures cause rapidly increasing house prices when conditions change and demand outstrips supply again, like we are seeing right now. And the use of blanket macroprudential or policy changes that could further disproportionately impact first-time buyers in the absence of sufficient action on new housing supply will only exacerbate the problem. As OSFI considers changes for uninsured mortgages, it is important that consideration of any such changes by the Department of Finance to the insured mortgage stress test be approached with caution. First-time buyers who are extremely well positioned financially and are very low risk would be locked out through such measures, further building up pent-up demand and crowding the rental stock.
Kevin, I hate to interrupt, but I do expect the translators are having a little problem keeping up with you. You're going fairly fast. Just slow down a peg.
Before any measures are introduced for insured mortgages, there should be a thorough review of the existing mortgage system through a lens of fairness and access for first-time home buyers. Other adjustments, like longer-term 7 or 10-year mortgages, as encouraged by the Bank of Canada, and 30-year amortization periods for first-time buyers, would be better routes in the insured mortgage space. On the supply side, the federal government should use its financial and suasion levers to encourage and support provincial and municipal government efforts to streamline permitting and approval processes, to speed up construction, reduce project financing costs, and get more supply online faster. It should provide leadership through CMHC on the key challenges to new construction, zoning restrictions, density limits, process delays, and very importantly, NIMBYism, including not just social but market rate housing. CHBA was pleased to see support in the budget for conversion of commercial space to residential and further recommends the conversion guide for such retrofits to support those efforts. CHBA was also pleased to see the expansion in the budget of the Rapid Housing Initiative and recommends the extension of the timelines to better reflect true construction timelines, especially given supply chain volatility. Also, the success in cutting through red tape of the RHI shows that federal leadership of a similar type could also be used to accelerate market rate housing supply. Also related to supply, CHBA is pleased to see the emphasis by the government on skilled workers and apprenticeships, with labor shortages already a challenge and some 22% of the construction workforce set to retire over the coming decade. Getting more young Canadians into the industry is essential. With respect to lumber, industry and consumers are currently incurring tens of thousands of dollars in cost increases for new homes, negatively affecting builders with contracts already in place, challenging the viability of projects and even businesses, and further deteriorating affordability for consumers. Closing times on new houses are now delayed across the country by an average of 6 weeks due to material shortages, according to a recent survey of our members. Builders and developers are now starting to pull back on housing pre-sales and starts due to the material price volatility and supply concerns. This will only further add to the housing supply shortage. The federal government needs to investigate all issues related to Canadian lumber supply and potential solutions to ensure a reliable and increased supply within Canada now and in the future. Finally, with respect to energy efficiency and climate change, CHBA is pleased to see the support being provided to energy retrofits. The Greener Home Initiative grants and supportive energy advisors, plus the addition of the $40,000 loan program, all based on the Energuide rating system, will help make big strides where there is the most to gain with respect to GHGs in the housing sector, the existing housing stock, and requirements to keep receipts will very importantly help fight the underground economy. On the new construction side, CHBA continues to lead with its Net Zero Energy Housing Council and home labeling program, which is now labeled over 600 homes across the country and is leading the way in finding the best way to reach these levels of performance while also addressing barriers to broader diffusion like affordability. At the same time, CHBA continues to caution against regulating higher levels in code before more affordable solutions are found and encourages the government to invest more in innovation to do so. Thank you very much for your time today. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Mr. Lee, you mentioned in your remarks that one of your recommendations was to provide the option of a 30-year amortization period for first-time buyers. How would a 30-year amortization period improve affordability for a first-time home buyer?
Well, in simple terms, it just allows you to lower your monthly payments, and also, of course, it enables you to have a little bit more buying power out in the marketplace because you're spreading your amortization over 30 years instead of 25. And it's particularly important for first-time home buyers. Everybody's been seeing for quite a while now the challenges for first-time buyers entering the market. And it's also important to note that first-time buyers are very low risk. In fact, when you talk to the mortgage insurance companies, yes, they are the best profile in terms of low risk, and it'd be a great way to help first-time buyers get into the market.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. You also mentioned that we need to support longer-term affordability along those lines by extending mortgage terms to 7 or 10 years. I know in previous discussions with industry officials in the mortgage sector that the Interest Act hasn't been updated for 140 years as it relates to mortgage. What could the federal government be doing to give Canadians more flexibility and security by looking at the Interest Act and how and what type of mortgage options are available to first-time home buyers and others?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, that act has been around for a long time, and a result of the wording of that act, we are sort of much more focused on 5-year terms for mortgages. So reviewing that act and providing more flexibility to enable financial institutions to more easily move to 7 and 10-year terms would just provide a lot more stability in the marketplace and give the encouragement to make use of those. And that, of course, would help with anyone concerned about even 30-year AMs or lowering the results of the stress test. If you were able to go to 7 or 10 years, some of those financial risks start to be mitigated even more so with that kind of length of term.
So what you're saying, by addressing the Interest Act, we could amend the mortgage stress test and perhaps make it easier for first-time home buyers to qualify for that first purchase?
Yeah, that's certainly been one of our recommendations when we look at the stress test in terms of if you wanted to step it down, well, how do you reduce the risk, since the stress test is about addressing risk? Well, the longer people have a locked-in term instead of having to renew in 7 and 10 years, because the stress test is very much about when you renew. So if you were able to get a 7 or 10-year mortgage term much more easily, by the time you come to renewal, you're that much further along in increasing your equity, through your career, and your income as a family has gone up, and you're just that much better position if in fact at that time mortgage rates have gone up.
Mr. Lee from the Home Builders Association. Nice to see you again, Mr. Lee. We've spoken in the past. There's a lot of things in your testimony that stood out to me. I certainly share your enthusiasm about the Rapid Housing Initiative, and thank you for sharing your thoughts on that and how it could be indeed strengthened going forward. But where you said, and I wrote down the quote here, there's much that can be done to increase supply in Canada as far as housing is concerned. There are levers that exist at the federal level to make that happen. Could you expand on the levers? I know you did in your testimony, but I think it's worth for all of us to hear more on that.
Yeah, I think there's probably 2 different areas. One I spoke to, which is the ability to provide more objective information through CMHC on zoning issues, on some of the better practices that can be used to help accelerate getting more market rate supply into the market at the municipal level. As well as NIMBYism is just such a huge factor for building anything pretty much anywhere these days. In fact, the only place you don't get it is when you build greenfield development. And ironically, you know, we're all trying to build smartly upwards and inwards as well through densification. That's the hardest thing to get done. So some work there would be really important. The other real levers that the federal government also has are funding mechanisms. And the government is committing to more infrastructure funding, for example, and tying that to good housing outcomes could be really important to really make sure we get the type of density around transit stations, you know, including market rate in that. There's obviously a focus on social housing and supportive housing, which is really important, but we also need to look at how we also support market rate housing, and the levers that the government has through things like infrastructure can really help that.
Thank you very much. The question is asked in light of the fact that we continue to see, especially where I am in the southwestern part of Ontario, but southern Ontario in general, just an exponential rise in the average cost of homes. And so any ideas that we can have at the federal level that would address that issue. And some of the comments that you just made would involve, obviously, zoning issues, and clearly that's a municipal matter, but there are things that the federal government can do further to what it is already doing, which, you know, some important steps in the right direction, but really appreciate you having an opportunity here to share your thoughts on what more can be done. Thank you very much.
Mr. Lee, I want to ask you a few questions. I'm connected to the construction industry for the last 30 years. I've worked with many of your home builder members. I spoke with a builder just on the weekend, and he informed me how the average home cost just from a lumber perspective has increased about $40,000 on the average home in this last year. And OSB board has gone from $8 a board to over $80 a board with limited supply now. So it's gone up 10 times. Dimensional lumber has gone up triple or quadruple in this last year. Do you have any explanation as to why there's this amount of inflation?
Yeah, well, we deal with lumber every day. It's a huge challenge right now. It is another situation of supply and demand. We've seen a huge increase in demand for housing of all forms across North America, and the lumber industry has had a very hard time catching up with the slowdowns early on in the pandemic and an unexpected boom in housing. And we have had transportation issues across Canada as well. It's going to be really critical that the softwood lumber agreement gets settled. That will provide some more stability for Canadian lumber producers. But we also need to look at what else can be done to get more lumber and keep more lumber in Canada and get it. It's, you know, one of our precious resources. How do we help make sure we have enough? We've talked about the shortage of housing and the shortage of housing supply. Right now we're being hampered as a country and being able to build more when there is that demand. So moving forward, we really do need to investigate everything that can be done. Our mills are doing quite a bit of work. Production is up compared to just prior to the pandemic, but certainly I think there's an opportunity for the federal government to dig in some more and see what else we can do to increase supply of lumber for Canadians.
One of the issues of concern I hear a lot about in my constituency is the availability of building lots, especially from the affordable housing perspective. You know, there's not an adequate supply of raw land that's zoned properly. I'm being led to believe it can take up to 7 years to go through the necessary approvals and regulations to move land to a situation where you can actually develop on it. Is that an issue you're hearing from your home builders, that there's too much regulation and red tape?
Yeah, certainly. And there's certainly lots of opportunity to streamline things, and we do think there's a federal role. Obviously, most of that occurs at the local and somewhat provincial level, but there is a leadership role and analysis role that the federal government can play to help streamline that, and also help, you know, municipalities get things done faster. Certainly through COVID, we've seen an increased use of digital processes to help move things along, more electronics being used to speed application and the rest. So also streamlining some of the competing regulations and looking at regulation to see what really needs to be done to help get more online faster would all go a long way to giving us the capacity to get more houses for the Canadians that need and want them.
My next question is to Mr. Lee. Thank you for your testimony. The budget proposes $300 million in the rental construction financing initiative, a program which supports the conversion of vacant commercial property into affordable housing units. And in your testimony, you touched on it. I'm wondering if you can comment on current interest in these types of conversions and explain the process of converting these spaces to the committee. And by extension, what types of construction workers, contractors, or suppliers are generally involved in these conversions?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So obviously what COVID has done is given a different look to many commercial spaces that we expect will be permanent and long lasting. And the ability to bring more residents into different areas a lot of the time will be in more urban cores is a great opportunity. So in terms of construction jobs, there's obviously a lot to be had. It runs the gamut. Retrofitting a building is, basically uses the same trades as building a new home. And so, from plumbers to framers to steel workers to electricians, it really runs the gamut. And I think there is a big opportunity to do this and also to do more. And because it varies a lot from project to project, more guidance could certainly help things move faster, which is why we're also recommending some work on guides to help the contractors do things in an efficient way and learn from each other as well moving forward as we do more and more of this.
One of the recommendations of your organization talks about the federal government providing leadership, and you have touched on this already a bit, but I think it's really important to emphasize. Provide leadership on the key challenges to new construction, i.e. zoning restrictions, density limits, and NIMBYism for all forms of housing, including market housing. Just furthermore, what role can the federal government play in this? Because some of these are uniquely municipal or provincial issues, but we're hearing more and more that the federal government needs to step up on the plate and provide that leadership. Can you give us some more concrete examples, please, about improving supply for new homes in Canada?
Yeah, I think, making sure that we know what the communities of Canada should look like in the future is a really important role of the federal government as well. It addresses NIMBYism, it addresses density. There've been a few questions about the Rapid Housing Initiative. Our Modular Construction Council members have been heavily engaged in that. I think it's quite a success story, but it also shows where there's a will, there's a way. There's a lot of projects going through really fast. We talk about 7 years to get land ready, but then all of a sudden when there's a few dollars available and we're trying to address some important affordable housing needs, all of a sudden projects are happening in record speed. Well, if we can do that in collaboration with municipalities for the Rapid Housing Initiative, surely there's opportunities to do that for market rate, which would include, houses that the average Canadian can afford.
So just to clarify, you're suggesting that the federal government use, say, infrastructure dollars to incent the creation of more supply to get homes built more quickly?
Exactly. I mean, there's a huge opportunity. The federal government makes big, important commitments to infrastructure. There's no reason why that can't and shouldn't be tied to making sure that's tied to housing that Canadians need.
Thank you.
You have
so
time
much.
for one more, Mr. Viss, if you want.
There's also been you've touched upon, just furthermore on supply, the federal lands initiative. Has there been any, from your understanding, has there been any movement on the federal government providing a list to home builders or to the nonprofit sector in housing to actually say where the federal government owns land and where it can be used for developing new homes?
I think there's only been a little bit of movement, from my knowledge at least, on that front, but we can look into it more. But it is an obvious and big opportunity. The federal government does own lands in a lot of very opportune places that would be great to provide all kinds of different forms of housing for Canadians. So it is a really great opportunity to be pursued further.